It's Zach Eady with Purdue men's basketball, and you're watching Boilers in the Stands.
Welcome back to Boilers in the Stands post-game show. Boilers lose. Not a great day for Purdue down in Alabama. I am your host, Greg Braggs Jr., back in the seat here. Alongside me, as always, on this program is one Joe Jackson. Craig Bowers actually made the trip down to watch that thrashing at the hands of the Auburn Tigers, who certainly look like one of the best teams in the country, as they're rightfully ranked number 2. And we're going to get into all of that conversation here today, as the Purdue Boilermakers were clearly just outmatched by a very talented team. So, Joe, I'll let you start off with your reactions from the game.
I know this is, I don't know if this is considered a hot take or anything of that nature. I learned absolutely nothing from this game. This went exactly how I thought. People that listen to most of the shows, I don't remember specifically the post-game show that I said it, as I see my camera's a little bit blurry. Sorry about that. Different setup. Traveling for the holidays. Hope everybody has happy holidays during this time and able to see family if you're able to, and all of that. Safe travels. But on one of the post-game shows, I said, hey, Purdue might lose to Auburn by 35. They go on an 11-0 run in the last 2 minutes to cut it to 18, but Purdue is just not on Auburn's level. They have never been on Auburn's level. Auburn is the best team in the country. Auburn has potential to be one of the best teams we've seen in the 21st century. We'll dive into some of the deeper stuff, and there are more things to talk about, but Purdue is just simply not on Auburn's level. There isn't. We could in theory just end the show after that. I think it's just kind of how this game is. Purdue's not there. Purdue is a good team still. I'll talk about that. We'll talk about that more later in the show for sure. Purdue is still a good team. They are not near that level, and it showed.
Yeah, no question about it. All the respect to Auburn. They look like a serious national title contender. I mean, the different players that have such great length and athleticism. I mean, you're watching a 6'10" guy guarding Braden Smith and locking him up on the perimeter, blocking the shot, then taking it the other way, leading the fast break, throwing the alley-oop. I mean, how many alley-oops were in this game? I certainly, as we get later into the program, maybe get into maybe the chalkboard and the dry erase board and maybe try to talk to us about why they just continue to do the pick and roll for the alley-oop and how Purdue was leaving that wide open. But regardless, just Auburn's style of play is just so suffocating, and on both ends of the court. And just for Purdue offensively, they had absolutely no answers, where they're not settling for bad shots. That was literally, it felt like their only option to even get a shot off. I mean, you can talk about lack of movement off the ball, but you can also credit Auburn to cutting those off too. So it's just, Matt Painter is always good at finding the answers to the puzzle, but there's just times where you're going to play teams where you're outmatched and you're not going to have those answers. And so Purdue drops their 4th game of the year, but because of the way Matt Painter schedules his non-conference play, those are to the hands of very good basketball teams. So it doesn't necessarily give an indicator that Purdue can't be a very competitive team in the Big Ten and a team that can find their way once we get into March. But as it stands right now, if they're trying to play the big dogs like Marquette and Auburn and other teams of that nature, they're going to have their hands full, and they're really going to have to pitch a perfect game to even make those kind of games competitive. And so, we can get into some of the roster flaws. I'm sure every show you guys probably talk about the different flaws of the big men that kind of give this team, some challenges, but ultimately we understand who this team is from a roster standpoint. And so you're just trying to figure out how you can continue to improve and find your rotations. I will say the one positive thing, for me at the end of the game, Matt Painter calls his final timeout. He only had so many timeouts to try to weather the storm, but I felt like that final timeout he used was to basically just put in the younger guys. And I'd like to think his message to those guys was like, all right, let's see what you guys got. And I liked what I saw from Jakari Harris and CJ Cox and Raleigh Burgess, where, they started to find a little bit of rhythm. I get it's, garbage time, so to speak, but those guys are the future of this program. So to see them kind of not let go of the rope necessarily and keep competing, you see what kind of talent those guys have.
Yeah, I mean, it was good to see that. They're gonna probably, if Purdue, it's all gonna come back to expectations, and I'm not gonna tell a fan what they should or shouldn't have expectation wise for this Purdue team. I think realistically, coming into the season, the people that had Purdue as a top 10 team, a clear-cut Big Ten winner, felt, I don't know the right word, it felt wrong to me. Like, it felt like you were very much over evaluating what this Purdue team has. Now, I do think it's going to swing the other way, where everybody's going to be like, oh man, Purdue sucks. Purdue's the worst team ever, all that stuff, and then they're not going to make the tourney. I think that's swinging way too far. Purdue they're a good team. They're going to be a tourney team. In this specific Big Ten year, they can still find themselves up near the top or even win the Big Ten, to be honest. But there are obvious flaws, and those freshmen have to grow. If Purdue wants to make that leap of not just being a ceiling as a Sweet 16 team, then the freshmen have to grow up. Burgess, Harris, CJ Cox, like, they're gonna be a bigger part of this team than probably anticipated. Heidi and Colvin haven't taken the big leap yet. The TKR at the 5 experiment is like, it's not bad, but at the same time, you kind of have to go to it out of necessity because there's no other big really to go to right now. Wouldn't hate seeing Burgess start really just getting more minutes at this point, especially against some of these teams where, a pick and pop would be there. I think it just right now, for me, it just comes back to kind of your expectations surrounding this team, and where you think, they can go and should go, probably dictate a lot of what you take away from this game. For me, like I said off the top, right? Purdue's not on Auburn's level. I think Auburn is going to be like historically good. Like, I think assuming they win, which is a big assumption given March Madness's nature, there's a good chance in 3 decades we look back and be like, man, that Auburn team was like insanely good. Purdue isn't there right now, and that's going to be the common theme for me. But this is still a good team. It still is a good team.
Yeah, no question about it. Yeah, I mean, no arguments from me there. I mean, like you said, the Auburn, historically good. I mean, they had a freshman. What did he have? Like 18 points.
Yeah, Pettiford's good.
Yeah, and then Baker Mazzara, man, he's really good. So you're kind of, it's a real challenge, right? And I think that teams that play that aggressive style and force the tempo and force the issue have always been teams that have given Purdue problems or challenges at the very least. And, I saw somebody, early in the show or in the comments saying like, well, Purdue doesn't have Zach Edey anymore. And that's kind of the point. When you're playing teams like Marquette and this, and now, like, you used to have that cheat code with him, right? That would rack up the fouls and everything else. But when you don't have somebody like that, that's just such a gravitational force. Now you got to play teams more straight up than you have been, where you've been the one that has the cheat code on your team. So, it's going to be a challenge. And I think Matt Painter will know what kind of adjustments need to be made in the Big Ten. I think later in the show, we'll kind of look ahead into conference play that's certainly coming up here soon. And so Purdue found their challenges. I think they have one more non-conference game against Toledo before they go into conference play, but we'll start to look ahead at the schedule as well, because we can like you can only, like you said, I mean, how much you really learn from a thrashing like this game, other than the fact that they're not at that level, which goes without saying, is, I think, we could find ourselves trying to overanalyze something that doesn't necessarily require that. Kraig rode down there today, and even he was saying, like, I don't, unless something earth shattering is said in the press conferences, he'll probably just hit the road to come back here, because I mean, what is, honestly, not trying to sell this game short, but what is there to say to it?
Exactly. And like, it doesn't mean Purdue is above critique or anything like that. It's just like all the critiques have kind of shown like they were more worrisome in the Penn State game and the Texas A&M game. Yeah, like I don't want to take away from this game of like and just completely skip it, but at the same time, it's just Auburn is that good. Purdue has issues. Purdue has 4 losses now. All 4 of those teams specifically can like take away everything that Purdue wants to do, and Purdue hasn't found an answer. And there is 2 ways to look at that. One, I'll start with the positive, and we're going to circle back to this later, of like the remaining schedule. We'll skip Toledo. I haven't watched them, but the rest of the Big Ten, right? I've watched every team like at least 6 times. There's like 2 to 3 teams remaining that could, in theory, kind of do what the losses, like the teams, the Marquette, Penn State, A&Ms have done. So there's that positivity, but then there is the negativity of like, hey, like Purdue has had 4 chances and they still haven't really figured anything out. They have no answer when a team is able to just kind of keep Purdue on the perimeter and use their athleticism and get out and run and get to the rim. Purdue still doesn't have an answer. So there aren't a lot of teams left, in my opinion, that can punish Purdue the way that some of these teams have. But, this is still, to me, a tournament team. There's a good chance that if Purdue wants to try to make it Sweet 16, and then at that point even try to make a Final Four, you're probably going to run into one of these teams, and they don't have an answer.
Well, and let's talk about that then before, I'll give you guys updates on some of the different Big Ten games around, that were played today. Some very good ones, some competitive ones, but let's focus in on Purdue. And when you talk about, having those answers, in games like this against teams like this, all right, if Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer are getting locked up on the perimeter and Braden isn't able to navigate the way he normally does, you're going to want to try to lean on TKR. He's the third of your 3-headed monster of guys that you're going to lean on to be, the guy that can change the game or keep you in it. And so I'm interested, because I did see some people talking about TKR in the chat, and we were kind of texting about him. And so it is interesting with TKR. I'm curious your thoughts, like, especially in a game like this, like, he's one of your best players, but even though like sometimes his numbers look very solid, it also sometimes feels like he's very outmatched. And so trying to understand what a reasonable expectation for someone like me as a fan sitting on my couch of what to expect for TKR in games like this.
It's tough. If Purdue had a true 5 that they could go to, like this would have been a better matchup for TKR. It's not like he played terrible, right? 15 points, 8 rebounds, only 3 turnovers. 1 of 7 from the line is inexcusable. I know he's not a great free throw shooter. 1 of 7 from the line is inexcusable. It just feels like, I don't know. I feel like Purdue hasn't quite hit the right balance of like, okay, how much do we need to go to TKR in the post? How much do we need to get him on the roll? I also think, this game and last game especially, the defenses did a great job of just showing length. I think that's the biggest thing right now is TKR hasn't had a ton of success against like a ton of length. I know Grant Nelson for Bama is like 6'11". Like it's not like TKR can't do it, right? But TKR likes getting in that short roll, that 10 to 15 foot area off the roll. He did that. If he did that today, it's you either have to shoot a floater or you're kind of getting ripped, to be honest. That's just kind of what Auburn was at defensively. You would like to maybe, when Auburn goes to Janai at the 5, like you would have liked to have TKR slide to the 4 in theory and just kind of go to the post. It's not like Auburn was doubling too much From what I remember, this game is a little bit of a fog for me, to be 100% honest. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, this is going on, but I don't know. It's like, I don't want to say his stat line was like empty today, although I guess everybody's stat line was empty, to be honest. I do think there is some level of like the physicality maybe doesn't quite match what they need from him. Of like, he's the one that kind of is like, hey, I want to play the 5 and stuff. If that's the case, like, he does have to be physical. Like, he just straight up has to be, and I think that's a common theme across the entire roster. Is this kind of a soft team? Like, they don't have the Gillis.
Well, exactly. That's what you said it a little bit ago, and now to even drop the soft word, and we're just not used to that. And when you said physicality a little bit ago, that's exactly where I was going to tee you up. Like, so, okay, you don't have the dominant two-time national champion to even the scales in a game like this. So when you're a grinder team, like we've seen before, Edie, the physicality aspect of a Matt Painter team typically would be the bedrock to get in a fight against teams that have better talent than you, which is like where Purdue's back to being, right? And so, to your point, like, soft would be the strongest way of saying it, but a lack of physicality is very abundant with these guys. Like, it's very apparent, I should say. Like, TKR is a solid player, but is he extremely physical? Caleb First is a very active player, but is he very physical? Berg didn't even play today, right?
Berg's the most physical on the team. He just has a lot of other flaws that make him not play.
Right. So, I mean, I know Braden will get in the fight. I know Fletcher will even get a little scrappy at times, but he's not like necessarily a physical player, right?
He's a physical player. He's just like doesn't have the strength to match, I think, what his intentions are always.
And then you have CJ Cox and Jakari Harris, guys that I think can be aggressive defenders on the ball. But even CJ got a couple calls on him when he tried to be, defend aggressively. And so there's still a technique to learn, how to play aggressive without fouling for those guys as freshmen. So, yeah, I think physicality is something that is going to be sorely missing with this team. And I don't know how much that can change throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's simply somebody has to step up and be willing to do it. I think Jakari maybe could be that guy, at least on the perimeter a bit. Maybe Burgess could be that guy as we start seeing him get a few more minutes. Yeah, I mean, you can see, like, just from the physical standpoint, like, they miss Gillis, they miss Edie. And it's just very, very evident at this point. Side note, Edie, we're talking about physicality and Edie. I don't know if you saw the clips and the pictures, but Edie and Draymond Green were going at it, and he shoved into the crowd.
Honestly, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on this program, but I'll say it because I don't give a shit. I wish he had knocked his ass out. Like, if Draymond can throw punches on his own teammates and stuff, all right, let's see what you got against Zach. I love as Zach just smirks at that dude and takes the fight right to him. Good for him. But yeah, it's like, when you just look at this and in its totality, and by the way, I think there's right now about 600 live viewers tuned in right now. And we appreciate you guys all hanging out with us on a Saturday right after an ass whooping like that from Auburn. And there's so many good football games on right now, other college basketball games on. So we appreciate you tuning in as always. Please hit that like button. These guys have been working hard all season long, and I'm going to do my best to start getting back into the grind of taking in as many college basketball games as I can now that the NFL season is starting to come to a close with the coverage I do with the Chicago Bears. So we appreciate all you guys hanging out. So let's get into it, Joe. Like I said, we don't have to go insane with this game. I don't know where you want to take this next. If you want to look at some individual stats, or if you did want to go to the dry erase board and try to explain to me why alley-oop dunks are always were wide open and open for business this entire game. But I'll kind of leave it to you on where you'd like to take this next.
I unfortunately did forget the dry erase board, and I haven't set it up online to be able to do it. I know.
My God, Joe.
Basically, I can somewhat describe it in words. The lob play, they run a high pick and roll, and they back screen whoever was guarding the screener. So generally, like TKR, sometimes Heidi. usually did that with like Lawyer. He would be the guy guarding the back screen. And basically all that, like the whole summary of it is Auburn did a fantastic job on those plays of basically making like Lawyer and Smith try to be the rim protectors. And like, that's not going to work out too well. Just straight up, right? Like that's just not going to work out too well. Auburn had really good spacing. And just, yeah, like from there, there's just basically no, for how Purdue plays with like their drop coverage and that, there's just nothing you could really do in terms of being able to kind of get to that with just given their personnel right now.
Yeah. I mean, it was open for business, and it was certainly, I know it was like a neutral court, so to speak, but it was definitely a home crowd, and they were feeding off that energy after every dunk. It felt like the energy would go up and up and up, and you just knew, like, I mean, sometimes with Purdue, you never necessarily count them out. And so it's kind of weird sometimes to watch a game where you're like, man, they're going to have no answer today.
I was saying this to some of my family and stuff. Like, it was a weird feeling for this game. This was like the first post-game show even before the game started where I wasn't like excited to do it. Not that, I still love doing this, all that. It's not that, but it was just like, it was also the first game, and I've been a Purdue basketball fan for like 6 or 7 years now. It was maybe the first game in that entire time period, or at least out of the last 4 or 5 years, where I came in being like, yeah, Purdue like doesn't have a chance to win this. It was a weird feeling. I have truly forgot what it felt like to feel that surrounding this Purdue team. But that's how I felt coming in, just given how good Auburn was. And it just made it weird where it's just like, I came into it, it's just like, yeah, unless Purdue plays perfect, they're going to probably get blown out. That's obviously what happened. And it was a really, really weird feeling to have, because I'm just, for the past however many years, Purdue is, even against like, maybe they're playing a little bit better team, there's plenty of ways that they could win. And it just felt like that was not really the case this year, or for this game, I mean.
Let me ask you this, because a lot of people are talking about the way Painter's building his rosters and he needs to reevaluate. And I know you certainly look at you do such a great job with those graphs of showing like the different classes each year and how it's all going to lay out for the next 4 or 5 years. And so let me ask you this, with the vision that Painter originally had, and then you lose Kanan Catchings in the offseason, and then you lose Daniel Jacobson to an injury early in the year, like how much would of those guys like change the circumstance of what the team is? I haven't really been following Kanan with what he's doing now that he's gone, but like, would it have been like, people are saying all this, that, and the other, but those two guys were part of this plan, and then it didn't happen for different reasons with both. So I'm curious to know what you think of like, because Kanan Catchings is obviously like a big time recruit, a big time player, and now he doesn't come to Purdue, and that changes the complexion of what you think that this team was going to be, at least last year when we thought he was coming here. And then of course Daniel Jacobson to help with the 5 spot, which obviously has been giving this team trouble. So I'm just curious your thoughts on how much they're missing that kind of impact, and B, what you think Painter needs to do differently to catch up with the times, so to speak, as people are saying in the chat.
It's a tough one, because I knew this one was coming, and I don't have the full answer, because I do see both sides of, like, Painter has said he recruits, like, he's going to recruit his guys, and you like getting guys in for many years. You don't expect to have 6 guys commit as freshmen. Like, you do not expect that to happen going into recruiting. It just kind of all happened that like these guys all committed. You're going to stick with them. That's just kind of who he is. You would, yes, in a perfect world, and maybe going forward with the expanded roster, you pick up 1 or 2 transfers. I understand though the philosophy of like, this is such a system heavy team that you want guys in for multiple years, because that's where you're going to see the max growth. Now, I don't know what the right balance is, right? Because like everybody will bring up Lance Jones. Lance Jones was awesome. But like going and getting a transfer doesn't mean automatically like, this is going to be great. Now, the Jacobson and Catchings things hurt bad, right? Jacobson, you bring up the comment there, we need rim protection so badly. Jacobson would have done that. You know who else would have helped do that? Cannon Catchings. Those probably would have been the two best rim protectors on this entire team had they both been here. Now they're, well, one's injured and one's obviously at BYU.
You'd still have to question, even with both those guys, the physicality aspect of it. Because like Jacobson certainly is a rim protector, but just with his frame alone, he was going to have some issues with physicality this year.
Yeah, and I think that's fair too. You would have just liked to see him be able to work through it. Like I don't think having Jacobson healthy and Catchings, like I don't think this, like Purdue still loses this game, but I do think they're probably closer to that next tier of like, yeah, they're not tier 1, but they're probably a tier 2-ish type team, and now they're a little bit probably below that. I think, like, I don't know, my take right now is there's going to be a lot of people saying they know exactly how Painter should run the program and he needs to do this and this, and like they don't know, like just straight up they don't know. I don't know. Doesn't mean you can't have your opinions and be like should Painter in an ideal world gone after probably another ball handler? Yes. Or another rim protector? Yes. But like even if he did, that doesn't automatically equate to success, right? Like what if, you know, David Jenkins is just the name I'm going to go to. I love David Jenkins. He's a Boilermaker forever. It wasn't like he had the most impactful year, right? And he was the guy that brought out a transfer portal. And so it's just going to be like, and I know this word right here that I'm going to say is hard for just fans in general. Like I'm not even like just every fan, because that's just, you know, you want to see your team succeed as fast as possible. You have to have a little bit of patience in this new era of like figuring it out. Like you're starting to see teams figure out, like Brad Underwood, right? He knows he's just going to kind of retool most years, and he's good at it. Painter knows that in general, he wants to keep guys in. But like now he's probably got to supplement at least one, like you have your core guys and then maybe supplement 1 or 2 players would be in theory the best. But it's much, much easier said than done, I think is kind of where I'm at. It doesn't like, I don't want to, I'm hoping I'm not coming across as like, you can't critique Painter, because that is not my take at all. But it's more of just like, I think there's a lot more nuance to it all than maybe we give credit for.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that. I don't like when people critique Matt Painter. He's my guy. And he should be everybody's guy. I mean, look at what he's turned this program to. And you see everyone in the, you know, the passion you see here in the chat, you know, and everybody kind of talking about this. And there's people going at Painter, sure. But that speaks to the expectation level of the fans for this program and what they want this team to be and to stand up with the top teams in the country. And so you can't have that expectation level without acknowledging who's the one that set that standard here and raise that bar. And look at some of the players he's brought in here over the last 10 years, you know, whether it be Carson Edwards or Jaden Ivey or Zach Edey or whatever. And so I understand like people's frustration and you know, everybody's kind of always going to search for answers, and that's good. Like,
yeah,
don't just talk about the problems, you know, like try to talk about the solutions too. And so that's a good practice, but I'm not a big, I've never been, if for me, I like, okay. So the other thing I'm seeing a lot in the chat is the system basketball doesn't work with the way Matt Painter runs his offense. I mean, you heard before the game that Bruce Pearl was throwing flowers at Matt Painter's offense, that he has so many different plays. And so for me, I'm a big advocate for how detailed and so how extensive, you know, how many different plays and you know, the way they run offense. I think that's a good recipe for good basketball at the college level. But for you, like when you watch a team like Auburn, you know, almost, I don't want to say positionless basketball, but like anybody can make a play. And you see some of the great teams that win national championships play that way, don't necessarily play the way Purdue plays. So I'm curious your thoughts on like that overarching theory of the way Painter plays with structure versus other teams that are a little more free.
It goes back to roster and how you recruit. And then there's I think there's more nuance of like, yeah, it's fantastic in theory to go talk about, hey, let's go recruit these 5 stars. Hey, let's go get this athletic wing out of the transfer portal. Hey, let's go get these dudes that can go make plays. And there is a balance of like, yes, you still in some capacity have to go get those dudes, but at the same time, you got to fit to your system, right? Like people are saying Purdue's too systematic or whatever. Like if any, honestly, in a game like today, they're almost like too not systematic to me. Of like they didn't run enough plays to try to get looks. It was probably maybe a touch too much pick and roll of like just kind of try and go make a play. I saw more Brainsmith ISOs than I've in today's game than I've seen maybe all season.
Yep.
Like he is letting them go and play. Now it's that balance thing again, right? I'm gonna keep going to that of like you need guys that can go do that, and Purdue badly needs another guy besides Brainsmith that can go do that. That's right. That's maybe could have been solved with the transfer portal, but at the same time, you don't want Fletcher Lawyer ISOs. You don't want Jakari Harris ISOs. You don't want aside from TKR post ups, like you don't want TKR ISOs, right? Like and
CJ Cox, I think, could be that guy eventually, but
yeah.
like as a freshman, that's a tall order to ask for him.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have to kind of get through these sets at times, and then Auburn does a great job of like, Purdue has their game plan. Auburn also has a game plan, and Auburn's game plan won out today, right? And that's also another factor into all of this is Purdue couldn't do anything, so then Brainsmith did have to ISO and try to go create. Now he can do it, but nobody else really on this team can.
Well, and isn't a part of this too that Miles Colvin and Cam Heide, right? Like these are two guys that have athleticism that are different than the bigs or Braden and Fletcher that are supposed to be contributors on both ends of the court because they have this athleticism, but there's times where both guys aren't really factors and sometimes disappear even when they're on the court.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Yeah, I don't know really where Purdue, like within this season, like does Purdue just probably have to play the freshmen more at this point and just you kind of got to live with it at least for some of these matchups, because that's who you have. And like I still think you got to recruit the right dudes, right? You got to recruit the right locker room dudes, especially for a program like Purdue that's not like Purdue is never going to get the top tier talents. It's just not how Painter's going to run the system. It's not how Painter's going to try to recruit. And he said he's going to go get his guys. He's not going to go fight for the 5 stars that are at this point in time going to, ask for lots and lots of NIL money. I don't know much about that on the backside, so I don't really want to get into much of a discussion of that. But Painter, I would say, I guess Painter needs to find the right balance of like getting a lot of his guys and then just still filling the couple holes that there are. That maybe would have been a big man this year or another ball handler, but also like Jakari and or CJ easily could be the secondary ball handler, right? If Jakari, like, I'll still stand on the take. If Jakari Harris could shoot the ball, was shooting the ball much better, he would be that guy this year for them. And they would be not all problem solved, but some of the problem would be solved.
And he knocked down a 3 at the end of the, in the second. That's what I mean. I mean, if you're looking for the only bright spot moment in this beatdown was that I felt like there was like a 4-minute stretch where you saw the freshmen, show the ability they have.
Yeah, exactly. And they're going to need more. And like you mentioned the Colvin and Heide thing earlier. And I don't know if I think you asked about that and I just didn't answer it, so my bad on that.
No, it's okay. I don't know if I'm being too harsh about it and suggesting that they disappear. You see Tariq or Tarek. Yeah, I'm back to doing this, so you're just gonna have to forgive me. But Heide and Colvin are athletic, but not used correctly in the lineup. And I think somebody else brought something up about them that I'll try. David Jenkins saying Colvin and Heide have to get hungry and aggressive. And it does feel that way to me at times. Like when they're struggling to find a bucket and they kick it out to Colvin, and I feel like he needs to pull up on it because there was a couple times he did pull and it just rimmed out. Like it was a good shot. It just didn't go down. Well, you got to keep shooting, man.
That's the theme, I think. And also Purdue's losses. I've mentioned every time, but I don't think it's talked about enough of like, maybe not this game, right? This is a little bit different. That A&M game, Purdue was Colvin and Heide, especially Lawyer didn't really get looks from 3, but Colvin and Heide missed a ton of wide open 3s. CJ Cox, I think, even missed a couple. Jakari if Jakari took one, I think he probably missed it. There are a lot of times that Purdue gets very good looks from 3 and they just haven't fallen at the right times. And some of that's a lot of it's Colvin and Heidi. Like Colvin and Heidi have to be better. And I'm going to push back on like they're not used correctly because like I don't even know what that means, to be honest. Like those guys are in my opinion, and maybe you have a different opinion on who they are as players, and that's where the difference comes from. They're 3-and-D players. They are going to be catch and shoot guys, pretty good defenders. I don't want really them taking more than 2 dribbles, but they have to be aggressive and they have to hunt their shot. Like you don't want the ball in their hands running pick and roll, right? You want them spotting up, and then it's on them to be aggressive. I agree with that part of like maybe they do need to, like, if they get a kick out and it's contested, dribble once or twice and try to get downhill. But I also know, like,
if you're gonna be catch and shoot players, then when you catch it, you gotta shoot it.
Exactly.
You can't be catch and kick players. You gotta catch and shoot.
Yeah.
And then all you're doing then, if you're catch and kick, then all you're doing is sending it back to Braden with 6 seconds on the shot clock.
Yeah. And that's where like the development of them as being this guys that can attack off the dribble hasn't matched what they need, right? I'm not comfortable with either of them taking more than 2 dribbles contested. But at this point, they still have to be able to do it in some capacity. They still have to try, and especially a game like this or A&M where the defense is so tough. Like you kind of just have to have it from them and be able to create a little bit. They're not going to be crazy high volume ISO crossover dudes, but attack, get downhill, 1 dribble, 2 dribbles. Because even if it's not your shot, hopefully it should in theory open up something else. But I do understand like that is not their strong suit at all. Like it just isn't their strong suit. And so then it's like, are you asking them to do too much because they haven't developed in that way that you do need to have somebody that can create? Like Floyer's great at attacking off the bounce. His issue is he gets caught in the paint sometimes with just not being able to, he gets over, he goes up against more physical, more athletic players, and then he gets hurt or not hurt, but that's where he kind of falls. Like if Colvin and Heidi had the mentality and just if Colvin and Heidi had Lawyer's handle, Lawyer doesn't have like an insane handle, but if Colvin and Heidi had Lawyer's handle, that would actually, I feel like, solve a lot of issues for this Purdue team.
Right. Well, and he also, I mean, he's probably more of a threat to, opposing teams to knock down those shots that he gets better angles, coming around a curl, right? I think that's probably part of it as well. So, like I said, I think we want to look big picture, and we've kind of been speaking more in generalities than the actual breakdown of today's game and what went wrong. We know what went wrong. This team was outmatched.
Auburn is what went wrong.
Right. Purdue played Auburn. That's what went wrong. They were severely outmatched by a very good team. But that, doesn't necessarily give an indicator on how this is going to go in Big Ten play, because Purdue now has 1 game left with Toledo here over this holiday stretch. And then when the new year starts, we are into Big Ten conference play. Rutgers played Princeton today, and that one went right down to the wire, and Princeton came away with the victory. And then UCLA was up, double digits on North Carolina, and North Carolina came storming back in the second half and won at the very end. So a couple Big Ten teams falling. I think Ohio State is playing today too as well.
They're playing Kentucky right now.
How's that game going?
I can look. I saw somebody say they were actually up a few.
Ohio State's up 12 on Kentucky per Lynn Ream here in our chat. So Ohio State's up. So let's look big picture. As we kind of round third here on this show and let people get back to their Saturday and bevy of solid football games to watch. Big picture. Let's take a look at the remaining schedule. I'll pull that up. We've got Toledo. What were you going to say something, Joe?
I was just going to if you want to read it off, you should read it off for the audio listeners.
Yeah. I mean, I won't go through the entire thing. Let me just kind of, what am I looking at here? Oh, I'm like, well, I know I'm looking at the schedule, but I'm seeing these win-loss numbers here.
It's just KenPom projections.
Okay, that confused me. I'm like, wait a minute. So like I said, December 29th, they play Toledo, and then you've got Minnesota to start Big Ten play in the new year, and then Northwestern, Minnesota, Northwestern, and Rutgers. So 2 of those 3 are away games, and then back at home against Nebraska. So let's just start with these first 5. I don't know if we necessarily need to go through the entirety of the rest of the schedule, but maybe focus in on these next 5 games. You got Toledo, so we can kind of wipe that one away, and then you've got Minnesota, Northwestern, Rutgers, and Nebraska.
So this is where I'm going to start being a little bit more positive about this Purdue team, right? I said it a little bit earlier. I don't think there are too many teams in the Big Ten that can do what some of these teams have done to Purdue. Penn State obviously did, and they're in the Big Ten. UCLA can absolutely do it. Oregon maybe can't. And then there's, Rutgers, Northwestern, like they have personnel that could in theory. You look at that first, we're going to just skip the Toledo game. You look at that first 5-game stretch at Minnesota, at Minnie, home against Northwestern, at Rutgers, home against Nebraska, at Washington. Minnesota, Rutgers, Washington, in my opinion, 3 of the 4 worst teams in the Big Ten.
Okay.
What I think this stretch has done for them is it's given them less wiggle room. This is still a tournament team. I know there's going to be way overreactions, the sky's falling, all that stuff, and have fun if that's your take. This is a team that has a pretty, I don't want to say easy because the Big Ten is always a grind, but out of the if you could divide their rest of their schedule in half, the first half is by far much easier than the second half. That first really 11, we're going to exclude the Toledo, right? The first 11 Big Ten games from here, in my opinion, so that goes up. The last game of that stretch that I'm talking about would be home against USC. Out of those 11 games, 8 of those teams probably don't make the tournament. Maybe 9 of those teams don't make the tournament. And so where this team doesn't have as much wiggle room is they do have to get a couple on the road. Now, at Minnesota, that has to be a win. At Washington, has to be a win. At Rutgers, basically has to be a win, although I know that's a tougher place to play. It also means you can't drop the home games. Northwestern and Nebraska stylistically have given Purdue issues in the past. I don't know if they give Purdue as many issues this year. You can't drop those. Like at Oregon, that's a fine loss, whatever. You have 3 straight home games, Ohio State, Michigan, Indiana. Got to win those. At Iowa, that's a winnable game. Home against USC, very winnable. There's a very realistic case that this team, realistically, this isn't even me just being everything turns around. 9-2 over the next, or 10-2 over the next 12 games, and this team then sits 18-6, and there's still probably the issues in the back of our head, but it's not as upfront. And just the way the schedule broke, Purdue has to take advantage. Your away games, at Minnesota, at Washington, at Rutgers, at Iowa for that stretch, they got a good stretch of even those road games should be winnable, and then you got to take care of business at home. I really do think so. USC is February 7th. I think the national consensus is going to be much different about this team at that point than it is right now. Then they're going to get into a tough stretch at the end where we're going to see if they've kind of figured things out or not. Purdue had a crazy tough schedule, a crazy tough non-conference schedule, not only in playing good teams that give Purdue issues just stylistically. They're not designed to beat Purdue specifically, but though they're designed to beat Purdue style teams for sure. And so you kind of put all this together, you lose 3 of the last 4. There are a lot of issues. I'm not saying this team definitely has flaws, and they're probably not a top 20 team at this moment for sure, but I don't think that the season is over by any means. Now, if they start dropping some games in that stretch, that's a different conversation. But my opinion is I trust this team to I trust this team to honestly go 10-2 in that stretch. I think probably lose at Oregon, and then maybe 10-2 or maybe 9-3 at worst, where you lose at Oregon, maybe you lose at Iowa and you drop one of the other road games where it's you probably should have won. I know I just rambled a lot, but to summarize, this season is far from done. This team has after the toughest stretch of their entire season, has their easiest stretch of the season coming up, and they have games to get things right. Now they have to do it. They have to execute. They have to take care of these games. They cannot let these slip. but they are still in the spot to me of like they can be fine. They can compete in the Big Ten. They can compete for the Big Ten. I'll bring up the comments that I starred. Gentry BN says we probably are 10-10 to 13-7 for conference play this year. I would probably agree with that. 13-7 might win the Big Ten. That's just how the Big Ten is this year. Like 13-7 is nothing to scoff at. I don't know if 13-7 hangs a banner, but I wouldn't be shocked if it does. And so that's my Big Ten rant, my Purdue upcoming schedule rant, my Purdue positivity rant. That does not mean that there aren't issues with this team, but I do not think that this season is over at all.
Yeah, and it'd be nice if I can join a post-game show where the Boilers have won, because it feels like the ones I've done this year, they've lost. And when I do Chicago Bears post-game shows, they've lost 8 in a row. So I'm getting real sick of doing post-game shows after my teams lose, but this is where we're at. And similarly to the Bears, their first half of their schedule of their season, it was like, okay, they have 10 games, 10 games before they play their conference teams. And they need to win 7 of those. And then what happened is they didn't, like they had an advantageous early season schedule, and then they weren't able to take advantage of that. And then they hit the heart of their schedule, the tough part, and they're just getting steamrolled now. And so like to try to compare that now to the Boilers, and what we're all looking at is, okay, you've sold me on, okay, they've got a advantageous early start of this bulk of the Big Ten. But if they don't take advantage of it, and this is where it's a hard spot. Okay, you got Toledo, that's a get right game, but you have to immediately be ready to get going against Minnesota, right? You can't let this, you've lost 3 of 4 good teams, fine, you can accept that, but it's so this team hasn't really, I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, they have an advantageous schedule, but have they really found themselves enough to where we can trust them to win those games that you're saying, Joe?
For me, yes, just because like I'm banking on more of like, it's not like we haven't seen this Purdue team play good, right? Or play well. They beat Bama at home. They beat Mississippi. Like that Ole Miss win is going to age pretty well, it seems like. They get a win against Maryland at home is aging fantastically. Maryland might be the best team in the Big Ten. They have these good wins. They just, I'm banking on the fact that my thought that this stretch is like a ton of teams that do a lot of similar things that can take away exactly what Purdue wants to do. And I'm banking on there's not that many teams left that can. But you are right. Like it is, I go back to, I'm going to like, hey, it's great that I can say this, right? I think, and I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable in the Big Ten. Like I think Purdue has a good schedule. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to, okay, well, you have to go win at Minnesota. Minnesota's the worst team in the Big Ten. You still have to go on the road and do it. And so I think you were absolutely right in that of like, we still have to see it. I can't just be talking about it and, that be good enough. They have to go and do it. And it's going to be as simple as that. We're going to, there's a scenario where the season is done within a few weeks. If this stretch, they do drop a lot. Winning those games doesn't necessarily mean that everything's fixed, but it means that things are looking back on the right track and kind of gearing up.
Well, it gives you a margin for error, because even with some of these great Purdue teams we've had the last 3 years, you see as you start to get closer to March how much tougher the games get, and the grind of the Big Ten starts to wear on everybody. And even if you're a great Big Ten team, you start to drop some as you get closer to the Big Ten tournament. So even if that certain freshmen or certain rotations or players haven't found themselves yet, they've got to find a groove of starting to knock down some wins, whether that means that they're actually a good team or not. But then that's going to give you a margin of error for later in the year when there's those inevitable war of attrition games that you lose because of fatigue and just the rigor of a Big Ten schedule for everybody. And so then by then you're hoping the freshmen have really started to come into their own. And then when you get into the tournament, because you won the games you're supposed to, in theory, that's when they could be a quote unquote dangerous team that doesn't have the expectations that the last 4 years teams have had. So that's kind of, I think, the most simplistic fan way of, I guess, looking at it.
Yeah, and I agree with you honestly on that. Like a lot of that of this Purdue team is not a national title contender right now. They're still a tournament team. I do think the maybe not like from last 2 years teams is just a completely different story. But like the teams before that, where it's like they get upset early, a lot of it goes back to they don't have a guard, right? They don't have a good guard. They have to go through the post. I am interested in let me run with this optimistic scenario where Purdue turns things around. They go 10-2 over the next 12 games. They finish the rest of the season pretty good. Maybe they win the Big Ten, or they're top 5. We'll say top 4, top 5. Their tournament team. Come March, they now have the guard. Like 99% of teams that they play, like they'll have the best guard on the floor, and people always use that against Purdue in the past, right? Of they don't have a good guard. They do have the guard that it could be interesting to see. Maybe Purdue is the team that just goes on one of those runs. And now, yes, this is a team that probably maybe I'm not saying they shouldn't make the Sweet 16 right now, but in theory, talked about as not a Sweet 16 team. Well, now they get hot. I like they have that personnel more to get, I think, streaky and go on a run. They just got to make it to the tournament, try to get to a 5-6 seed, something like that. And then kind of anything can happen from there. And I still have hope. Like I think people saying this is not a tournament team is a bit of an overreaction, at least for now, in my opinion. But we'll see. Maybe they continue to drop games, and then I'll look dumb.
All right, sounds good. Well, once again, appreciate everybody tuning in here on Saturday. After a tough loss to Auburn, please hit that like button. Shout out to Kraig, who made the trip down, as he always does, to almost all these tournament games and non-conference games. He's always traveling the country and the globe to follow these Purdue Boilermakers, which just speaks to the passion that he has for this team. So please hit the like button for Kraig as I try to do my best to hold down the fort in his absence. I know his analysis is sorely missed on today's show, so hopefully I'm doing as much as I possibly can to hold up my end of the bargain for you guys. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with us as well. I know you had a couple starred comments that maybe we can get into, and then maybe we can call it a night.
Yeah, I'll get into a couple of those. David Dillman said in 2019, Purdue dropped key non-conference games and went on a tear in the tournament. Obviously, that is the Carson Edwards run, the Ryan Klein run. That team at this point in the year, everybody I think was saying, hey, that's not a tournament team. After I forget exact, I remember they had one like pretty bad loss. I'm trying to remember specifically who was to. I'm going to pull it up now. Yeah, they lost the neutral against Notre Dame. They were 6-5, and that team went to the Elite Eight. Now they have Carson Edwards. Braden Smith's not quite Carson Edwards-esque in terms of just creative shots, but the season is far from over. There's still a lot of games left, a lot of games to be played. Blake Widmer, question, I love PJ and he's growing, but is he in over his head a little bit? It seems like our offense is very predictable and defenses have us locked in, might be limited in his experience. I don't know if I would go that far of like he's in over his head. There's definitely got to be some changes, but at the same time, like, There's got to be something. I think where I'm at is there's got to be something Purdue can go to when Smith and TKR aren't cooking, that they at least can alleviate a little bit of pressure. But in the long run, you want the ball in Braden Smith's hands, because more often than not, Braden Smith's going to be the one making the best play. I still trust PJ. I think it's going to be fine. Last comment, Michael Gordon, does strength of schedule save us in the long run? And I think so. In terms of like the 4 losses, I don't know specifically. I think, yeah, at Penn State, that's going to be a quad 1. All 4 losses are quad 1 losses. There's no bad loss. They also have a few really good wins. Home against Bama, home against Maryland, neutral against Mississippi. The NC State one's whatever win. It's not a great win, but it is a win. Purdue right now has the 13th toughest non-conference schedule in the entire country. And a lot of the teams above them are teams that use these bye games to basically fund their program. Like there's not too many high conference teams with a tougher non-conference. So I do think it helps them, right? Is in terms of tournament seeding and all that, these losses aren't going to hurt them too bad. In terms of how people view this team, that's where it hurts them a little bit more. in terms of just where they're specifically at in terms of national title contender, Big Ten contender, all of that. So
we have an Auburn fan here in the chat trying to help Purdue fans, come back off the ledge and using some fan transitive properties here by saying you guys are too hard on yourselves. Purdue is good and not overrated. They just ran into a buzzsaw. Auburn beat Ohio State by 38 last Saturday, and now Ohio State is beating Kentucky in the second half. And right now, Ohio State is either up 10 or 12 on the number 4 team ranked in the country, Kentucky, with about 13 minutes to go in the second half.
That's going to be the Big Ten this year of like Ohio State lost by 40 to Auburn. They're beating Kentucky now. I don't think Ohio State's like a tournament team personally, but like you could also make the case that at their ceiling, they're like one of the teams that should be the best in the Big Ten. I'm going to be annoyed. There's going to be so much overreaction game to game in the Big Ten, but the answer is going to be every Big Ten team has a ton of flaws. There are a lot of teams that also have very high ceiling, or not very high, but high ceilings. It is going to be a grind. Do not be shocked if the team hanging a banner is 13-7 in Big Ten play. Like, do not be surprised if that happens. Also, shout out, Ear Waggle, War Eagle. Shout out him for joining as an Auburn fan.
Yeah, Ear Waggle.
I love Auburn.
I did say War Eagle, and it says Ear Waggle.
Yeah,
man, I am. I've been up every night till like 4 a.m. the last like 5 nights, so I'm not seeing straight right now. So, but I appreciate everybody. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Once again, hit that like button one more time if you haven't already before we call it a night. Thank you to everybody that tuned in. Thank you as always to Kraig Bowers for the coverage he brings as he's on the road following this team. I'm hoping to get to Mackey here soon. And Joe, obviously, thank you for all your analysis as you always do. I'll finish this by saying we won't see, more than likely, probably won't be back on before Christmas and the holidays. So just wanted to wish everybody a happy holidays and enjoy this time with your family over the next few days. And we appreciate everyone's support. And this is the Midwestern goodbye. Tammy, I know you guys have missed this. So this is where we're at, but certainly thank you for letting me come on and I was telling Joe, I called him at halftime and I was like, Joe, please carry me in this show so I don't sound like a complete idiot. And I was like spitballing thoughts during the game off of him just to see which ones would fly during the show. Cause I'm like, man, I mean, I've been watching, don't get me wrong, but like you guys are just much more dialed in at this point. So I just kind of feel like a fish out of water. So appreciate everybody's patience with my analysis at this point, but it'll get better as I get a little more dialed in and get a little closer to this team now that we're entering the NFL offseason. So we appreciate all you guys.
Yep. Shout out Braggs. This is the flu game for him, his flu game. So
yes, exactly right.
Shout out everybody for tuning in though. Do appreciate it. Hope everybody has happy holidays, safe travels, all of that. Yeah, I doubt we're back. Well, we'll have a Toledo preview out, but I doubt that's not till after Christmas. And then there'll be the Toledo post game, December 29th, and then it's into Big Ten play. It's into the grind, and it's going to be fun. I'm excited. I'm excited for a little bit of a break, but I'm very excited to get back and just see what this Purdue team, see what this Big Ten conference does.
Let's get it. Okay, appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll see you here next week. Keep your heads up, Boilers fans, and always boiler up.